Welcome to video 5 of the Harmony and Light Quilt-Along. In this one, we get to take our finished quilt top and quilt it into something beautiful. This is one of my favorite parts of the quilting process, and I'm excited to show you how I did it with my quilt. So you're going to want to get a piece of batting that's larger than your quilt, get backing that's larger than your quilt, and if you don't want a piece of backing that's large enough, I want you to know that very, very wide fabric exists. This is 108 inches wide. So all you have to do is cut it the width of your quilt top and you have a big piece of backing. This is one that I designed and I think it goes really nicely with the colors of this quilt. So once you have your backing and your batting, then you get the quilt basted. I decided to put my pins evenly spaced apart, one in the center of each of these contrast diamonds. You could baste it differently, especially if you're thinking of a different quilting design than I am, as long as you get it sort of locked down so it's not shifting a lot while you're trying to quilt it. But what are you going to quilt on it? That's the question, right? There's so many ways that you could quilt a finished quilt top, and there's no right answer. When I'm looking at a quilt top, I'm sort of investigating it for clues and also thinking about what will help me do the kind of quilting I like and the sort of the efficiency of quilting I like, where I don't have a lot of stops and starts. And we already talked earlier about how these places that a lot of the seam allowances are coming together, that's a place where it's a little bit thicker there and it might be trouble trying to quilt over it based on my experience. So my quilting instinct says don't go quilting in that area. So whatever design I pick, I want to stay away from these places where the 6 of these diamonds are coming together. You could do an all-over design, just kind of trying to avoid those areas, but my preference is to do something a little more custom for this quilt. I like the distinction between the diamonds and the stuff that is more the background, so I'd like to quilt those 2 areas differently. I'm thinking about the structures. I know about the diamonds that I could put something in there. I want to do something special in there. And now I've got these big sort of funny triangle stars out here to think about. I could quilt that as all one section. Like I could fill it up with, say, any sort of background design that I like quilting. Or I could do something that's a little bit more regular and geometric. And because this quilt is so regular and geometric, that's sort of what I leaned towards, is that something that has the same sense of, order and the changing orientation like the quilt blocks do. So the way I ended up looking at the quilt was to see these sort of kite shapes that are made where the edge of one triangle meets the edge of another triangle right here. And I decided to find a motif that would fit in there. And if you do that 3 times in these triangle stars, then you filled up the whole thing. So that's sort of the preferences that I brought to this process. Let me draw it for you and show how we move through the quilt and what designs I picked out. Okay, so here we've got the quilt overall. Let me expand so we're looking at a smaller area. So what I decided to do in these diamonds, it was to do this sort of really textural design. So I like quilted textures so much. I wrote a whole book about how to get more texture in your quilting, and this design has a lot of texture. It's this sort of stretched out S shape, if you can see. It's like got one bump kind of pointing this way, one bump pointing this way, and that shape is sort of repeated all the way through the diamond, getting bigger where the diamond gets bigger, and then narrowing again as it gets smaller again. So one thing to notice about this design, here's how I like to think about it as I'm quilting it or drawing it, is that I'm going along the left side of the diamond first, always. No matter when I'm quilting this diamond in the quilt, I'm always going to start on the left side. And what that's going to do is make this shape sort of rotate through the quilting evenly, so you don't have some of them that are angling one way and some of that are angling the other way. They're all going to sort of match in a rotational way. So I'm always starting by going up the left side. And what I think is, in terms of direction, I'm going up and then flattening out and then going up. And once I finish that, then I'm doing the opposite, down, flattening out, and going down. Up, flattening out, and then up, down, flattening out, and down. Something I like to point out when I'm teaching this in my free motion classes is that I'm not directly echoing the shape. So I'm leaving more space here at the center of the shape than I'm leaving out here on the edges. The problem with echoing is, watch what happens if I try to echo this design. I'm going to bring this down a little bit. If I try to echo this shape and keep myself equal distant from the line the whole way across, two terrible things happen at once, I like to say. On this side, the design starts to get more horizontal, and then on this side, it starts to like approach infinity because there's no extra space being made at the edges for this design. So if you've tried this design before and you found that it flattened out or things got really out of whack, it was probably that you were trying to echo the shape instead of repeating the shape over and over. So just try it again. Try drawing it first so that you really understand the flow of the shape. Go up the left side, up, flatten out, and up, down, flatten out, and down. So that's how we get through these diamonds. And then what I decided to do in all the kite areas was a bit of a feather. So let me move over to a blank space so you can see how I did that. With the feather, I always started down at the narrowest part of the kite shape, kind of right after finishing one of the triangles. I started my first feather. And you can start on the left side again. It's sort of like a teardrop shape or half of a heart shape. I'm making a little one that'll fit there, leaving a little bit of space away from the edge so that I have room to come back and echo in a minute. And that echoing is going to give it more texture. I was able to fit 5 of these little half hearts up one side, put one in the center, and then fit 5 going down. And then once I finished that, I came back with an echo. And I ended up pretty much right back where I started. What you can do is just slide over and do the next one. Two, 3, 4, 5, the center one. And then you can kind of, as you go down, look at where the ones on the left side were and kind of match up the ones on the right approximately with that. It's not going to be exactly the same size or in the same place. That's okay. Once you echo it, it's going to look pretty good. Great. So that's the 2 different shapes we're filling, the diamond shape and the kite shapes in the background. I want to talk to you about what that means in terms of the whole quilt when we're working through the quilt. How I decided to do this, so I had minimal stops and starts, was to follow lines of diamonds through the quilt. So you can see they go in these big long stretches, up and down, diagonal both directions. And here's what that would look like as I was going through the quilt. I would do one of these feather kite shapes and then do the echo back. I would go to the other side of this diamond that I'm touching and do another feather shape and echo back. And then I would work my way through the diamond to the other side. At the other side of the diamond, I have access to 2 more kite shapes. So I can do this kite shape and echo it. I can do this kite shape and echo it. And now I'm out of out of open spaces to touch, and it's time for me to move on down the row. But to get there, I would have to go through this center spot, which I said I don't want to quilt over. So what I'll do is just quilt a circle around it and then go back another half time around that circle. And that brings me to the next open shape where I can do the same thing again. Feather and echo, feather and echo, go through the diamond, feather and echo, and go through the circle and on. So after you do that, you'll have some shapes to fill in, and you'll be able to figure out a way through there to get the last shapes to fill in. But you should be able to go from one side of your quilt to the other without needing to stop. Your thread might break or your bobbin might run out. That happens to everybody, but it should be a pretty straightforward process for you if you decide to do the quilting this way. So now that we've got the plan, I want to show you how I actually free motioned that on the machine. So to set up for free motion quilting, I've got the extension table on my machine. I've got the feed dogs either dropped or the stitch length set to 0. And I also have something to help me get a better grip on my quilt. So I wear these quilting gloves with the grippy dots on them. I've cut off the fingers so that I can take out my pins when I come to them. I can thread the needle. I can take pictures with my phone, whatever I need to do. So let's talk about this the way you would be starting. So I made this little sample just to show you a bit of quilting. You'd be starting at the edge if you're following the path that I followed. I started by pulling up my bobbin thread. I'm going to lower my foot here. And what I want to do is, I noticed that I'm at the point where 3 of these triangles come together. So I want to start with that circle that we plan to do where all the triangles come together. It's only going to be a half circle here because I'm at the edge and only half of the circle can fit here. And then I can go more around the circle to get to one of these kite shapes that I'm going to start with. And now I'm in the first kite shape, and what I want to do is end on this side so that I can go to the other one. So I need to start on this side because the side I start on is the side I'm going to end up back on after I do my echoing. Where I can, I'm leaving a little bit of space right here along the edge so I can fit my echo back in there. And now I can come back up with the echo. It's a rough echo. I'm not trying to make it perfect. So in some places it might be closer to what I quilted, in some places it might be farther. That's fine. The smooth line is the most important part. Great, we made it back to the circle. Now I can travel along that circle over to the other kite shape and start my feather over here. Now stitching along here with this really high contrast thread, I can see all my little inconsistencies. I bet you can see those in your work too. I want you to be nice to yourself when those happen and choose a thread color that blends. We haven't talked much about the thread color, but the one that I picked for quilting my quilt was a very, very light minty green. And so I find that a lighter thread when you're over darker fabrics tends to look better than a darker thread over lighter fabrics, but ideally you're getting something that kind of blends in and isn't high contrast through the most of the quilt if you want to see that texture, or if you just don't want people noticing the places that your stitching was a little inconsistent. So I'm using high contrast thread here so you can see what I'm doing and follow my path, but you don't need to use high contrast thread. You can choose something that's a little more matchy. Okay, so now it's time to go up through this diamond. I want to take out the pin so I don't accidentally stitch into it. And it's really narrow at the beginning here. I don't want to space my S's too close together, so I'm going to pay attention to giving them a bit of breathing room as I move up through the triangle or through the diamond. Up and flattening out and going up again. And then I slide up that line a little bit and then down, flattening out and down again. Sliding up the seam line, up, flattening out and up again. And down, flattening out and down again. Sometimes people ask me if it's cheating if they draw the design on the quilt first and then quilt over that. And I think that there's no cheating. Whatever makes you feel comfortable and confident about your quilting, I say do that. So if you would feel better about drawing those S-curves on and then stitching over them, that's great. Just be okay if you veer off the line and just work to keep your line smooth even if you get off of your drawn line, because a nice smooth line is what tends to look really satisfying in our quilting. Okay, so now that I'm at the other side of the diamond, I'm ready to do the other two feathers. So I'll get those stitched up. All right, we finished those. So now it's time to move around the circle to get to the spot that will meet up with the other diamond. So as I'm doing that, I'm just sort of kind of aiming for the spot that's right before where the diamonds end. I'm getting a little caught on my foot here. And then after I've completed the circle, I come back around again, and now I'm ready to move on. And that's it. Continue this pattern all through the quilt, and little by little, you'll be getting closer to the finish line. Thank you for joining me for the Harmony and Light Quilt-Along. This has been so fun. I really look forward to seeing the version that you make of this quilt. Send it my way however you can. Happy stitching.